So, hi everybody. My name's Greg Kinnaird, so I'm from Corporate Learning Solutions. Today I'm with Luke Amundson. He's from Peakon, which is a leading people analytics and employee engagement survey company. And today we're going to talk for about 15 minutes about all things COVID and its impact on employee engagement. So the interesting thing is I actually did a remote working survey back in February, and it identified that something like 58% of people were actually disengaged back in February. So the report that's just come out from Peakon was released in October. So it's going to be interesting to see this journey almost of a before, during, we can't really say after, Luke, at this stage, but it'd be interesting to see what we're actually both finding, what's happening out there on the global scale. So just to give a context for yourself, Luke, people who form part of our employee engagement strategies group, the HR professionals, they're working for large organizations, and it's a global reach. So if you think about global reach, Africa, Europe, Asia, America. And so essentially, I think everybody's really curious about this whole thing of, how has COVID impacted on an engagement. And a quote yesterday from one of my participants when I was running a management agile course was that COVID has actually brought everybody together. And they said within their organization, for some reason, the silos have actually broken down, but it's actually just got everybody on the same page, and it's actually brought unity. So I thought that was an interesting thing only 24 hours ago that somebody mentioned that. So Luke, did you want to maybe give a bit of broad background to Peakon, who they are, what they specialize in, and maybe your role as the Vice President for Asia Pacific?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Really good to be here with you, and the group around the world. It's always exciting to connect with so many people at once. So Peakon is an employee engagement analytics company, right? We have the largest structured feedback data set in the world, and it's growing exponentially because one of the key fundamentals that Peakon started with was that feedback should be frequent. It should be business as usual. And so instead of evolving that once a year process for many large enterprises, we've step changed that to, for some organizations, once a week or once a month. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people in one organization. So you can imagine the size of that data set grows quickly, and the insights that you can draw from that, both globally and regionally, I think are super interesting. I actually started in Peakon as employee number 15, which puts me, that was 4 years ago, and that makes me a dinosaur at Peakon. You fast forward to today, and we grew, we were one small office in London at that point with a headquarters in Copenhagen. And now we're 6 offices around the world, verging on 300 people, and a thriving business here in APAC based out of Auckland with a team in Australia. So it's been an amazing journey to go on, both with the company and also with our customers, because engagement, as I'm sure your audience would agree, is of huge importance both this year and as a key trend or shift in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that got me with the survey that Peakon released was the data points of something like 10 million people, which to me is just like crazy. So normally most survey work might include a couple of hundred, a couple of thousand, but have data points from 10 million. I'm thinking that must be quite robust and reliable by way of the data points. Did you want to give a bit of a context to the COVID survey that you did, specifically looking at employee engagement? So maybe just an overview to the survey itself.
Yeah, so if you think about the traditional definitions around employee engagement, the likes of like William Kahn quite often come up. But it's an employee bringing their full self to work. The output of that, or the outcome of that, I think is probably going to be well known to a lot of your audience, but increased productivity, reduced attrition, reduced absenteeism, more healthy, balanced employees that are more innovative and creative. So the connection, I think, what's interesting with this data set, the connection you can start to draw from increasing engagement inside of a company to direct business output is a lot closer, because you have so many more data points to draw on them from. And those correlations can start to get a lot more interesting. So what we did with this report around COVID was look at the difference that 2020 has brought globally and then regionally in the holistic definition of employee engagement that we have. We actually have a whole book around what the psychology of engagement is in terms of the data set that we've gathered. And because we've stuck with the same data set for virtually all of our customers, what we're measuring is largely the same.
It gives a baseline and a benchmark that do you slice and dice this information? So let's just say I wanted to find out all left-handed people that work in the airline industry in the Northern Hemisphere. Would you be able to like slice and dice that 10 million data points?
I mean, being left-handed myself, I can say that's probably the smartest slice and dice you can make. Yes, that is exactly how we're able to do it, because not only do we have say like company level data on employees, we actually have really deep demographic data. So while left-handedness is not necessarily the most frequent data point, things like tenure, age, background, and seniority are all things that actually go directly into the analytics and the output. And what I think for an individual manager, why that's interesting is because now I'm looking at scores that are not just relevant to, say, my company, but now it's my team that has the same tenure, seniority, and is the same generation as me. And what should I expect from that team? So you start to get far more granular when you can use the deeper level demographics that underpin the responses.
Absolutely. So with the survey that we did back in February earlier this year, our key focus areas were around engagement, but also too what we wanted to identify were things such as stresses in the workplace, but also relationships. So some of the interesting things that we found was, we found that when people started to work from home, they had more contact with the leaders. However, the correlation of that was that the relationship with the managers was diminishing. And then when we did focus groups, what we found was that the leaders were actually overly untrusting of people in the workplace, and they were having more connection with people, just have that visible line of sight. But what people were actually asking for was higher levels of engagement, empathy, and relationship, and that's the thing that actually brought engagement. And the other thing that we found as well was different age groups, different aging demographics. Those people who were 30 to 50 were actually most stressed, but their stresses were around family, educating family, finances actually, so personal finances, and there's correlations between those working in, say, government sectors that had job security versus working in private sector that had less job security, so the other financial pressures. So, so interesting.
Yeah, I think that manager point is really interesting because by extension, we saw the same thing. And what we saw in the data was virtually across any geography, the group that suffered the most in engagement and also in particular health and well-being, because we have a specific few questions that are directly related to that, were managers. Because you can imagine a manager is an employee dealing with the pandemic themselves and their family and all the things that go around that, but then they have a team. And very few companies changed manager expectation of output when the pandemic hit, whereas for individual employees the flexibility and everything was there, so the managers were the kink in the hose, so to speak. And they felt all of that pressure, and it's continuing today. You're actually seeing more worrying levels of burnout or signs of future burnout in managers than any other group moving into, say, 2021. So I think that's an area of actually concern to us that needs to start changing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So if you look at future trends, and I'm drawing upon experiences of Ernst & Young's work, EY's work with Future of Work 2030, Deloitte's, KPMG, essentially everything that we're experiencing today with COVID is actually what's predicted for 2030. So for me, it's a test run. Like, we're actually going through a litmus test, we're actually going through a case study to what the future actually looks like. And for me, it's really interesting to see how managers are having to adapt and mold, be agile, in order to deal with these flexible working arrangements as well. So I noticed in your report that you identified that there's something like a 2% increase in engagement during COVID. So let's assume it's from the beginning of the year, January to October. So we're talking, like a 10-month time frame. What are you finding? And then maybe I can relay what I'm observing out in the field.
I mean, my work in this space it doesn't go as far back as the global financial crisis of 2008, where I've heard or it's been commented you see somewhat similar trends in that in the middle of a crisis, why are employees more engaged, right? And it was almost I thought it could be the opposite until I heard our data science team. And I think the rationale there it can be pretty obvious though as well, because you to your point at the beginning, if you have a common enemy outside your walls, you come together. And the biggest change that employees saw day to day was where and how they worked. And most organizations, to be fair, around the world did really well. At least most Peakon customers, you can say, which is pretty large swath of companies, did pretty well in adapting that particular piece. And then the empathy on the back of that, in relating to the personal circumstance and the flexibility, was the other one where you saw actually quite a divergence. Some companies that did well saw a huge jump in the mental, physical, and financial well-being scores of the people, and others, took a huge hit. And so in that piece, it was quite a divergence. But you also had regional differences as well. For example, Australia and New Zealand. While the global average was 2%, and by the way, context-wise, 2% has never been seen in Peakon in full. Like since 2015 through to today, you've never seen a jump like that in that short of a time span. So while seemingly small, it's actually really statistically significant. We've updated benchmarking because of it, because it is such a huge movement. But even Australia and New Zealand, Australia, you didn't see 2%, you saw 1.5%. Whereas New Zealand, you saw 6% increase. And you could probably say there's a macroeconomic and health response to that in terms of what New Zealand did and the outcome of it. But you also, I think, are seeing just different policies of companies flow out of that too.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot, I think the connection to engagement, there's a lot to do with shifts of power. So for example, when I worked in mining, when I found iron ore prices were up and gold prices up, the power was actually for the employee, and they could basically ask for whatever they wanted, or they walked for another $5 an hour. When economies are down, then the power shifts back to the employer. And I think people are just happy to have a job, and I think maybe they just appreciate things a lot more with that. But the other thing that I found, that those companies that were successful, they were very much more engaged with the people when they made the transition into the home environment. And I found that those that were not affected with engagement were still very much based around getting the results and around the communication. So for example, the worst piece of communication that I heard was, okay, you have to work from home, but don't take any office equipment with you, because it's a company asset, right? And like, how does that work? Like, there's just that for me, that's like 1950s like mentality. And thinking about what you're saying, you're seeing current managers burning out. Burnout is only because people have been stretched outside of their roles, and maybe the role of the manager has actually changed from today to what it will be in 2030, and managers today are actually experiencing the competency skill sets that's required in 10 years' time, but it's just outside their comfort zone. So maybe that's why there's the connection of their stress levels and burnout.
I would totally agree. I mean, you get, in many companies, you get the rise of the technical manager, right? They're very technically good, but their people capability is not up to scratch. Thus, the burden on people teams or HR teams to help fill that gap. Whereas, you're in the pandemic, you're on the spot. You're either aware and have those skills, or you didn't in that moment in time. Whereas a lot of managers, I would hope, now that we've moved on to more phases of the pandemic are seeing some of the benefits or outputs of their people team to help them cope and learn those skills that they probably didn't have. Go ahead.
The biggest shift that I've seen just in the last 12 months is a couple of the exercises we do is what makes an authentic leader, what makes an inspirational leader. We get people to identify what they see, just from past experiences. The big trend that I've observed by way of what people are identifying is a leader who leads with empathy, the high levels of trust, high levels of integrity, high levels of concern. So if I go back 12 or 18 months ago, those things were there, but they were further down the list. But for some reason, they're much higher up the list. So this goes back to the survey work that we did. We found that people had more connection with the managers, but they actually had less relationship with the managers. Yet there's a real human need for the workforce to have empathetic leaders, because it's just a whole lot of stuff. There's just a whole lot of stuff that's happening at home that they're either bringing to work or working from home.
I think it goes back to, and some of the comments, this is more anecdotal than from the data, but in talking with our clients, it goes back to two things: vulnerability and being human. And neither of those things, unless you were kind of a forward-thinking leader, neither of those things featured very highly up until now. Being human with a Zoom call with your kids in the background as a CEO in a t-shirt on your couch, that didn't happen. That was the anathema of being a proper CEO. Whereas today, we had that exact story from one of our, it was a 10,000 person company. The CEO recorded a weekly video from their house around what's going on in the company. And when the Peakon results came back, it was so clear the impact that was having. And it's just a simple being human about that I think people can really relate to.
It's a radical concept, isn't it?
No. Being human.
I know, like being human is a radical concept. But there's a lot to do with like EQ. So for some leaders, they have that awareness, but I'm still shocked at how some leaders have like no awareness, self-awareness at all about the impact that they have on other people. So for example, that statement of, work from home, but don't take the equipment. But then I have to ask from a self-management perspective, what are they doing to at least regulate themselves and at least trying to get engagement? So it just shows you growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I think in this current environment, I think those people, whether it's the workforce, whether it's the leaders, that have a growth mindset and basically say, look, here's the situation, it's short term, things are happening for a reason, like what can we learn from this whole experience? I think teams that have growth mindsets are the ones that are going to adapt and survive, not really survive, but just going to adapt and adhere through engagement just a lot more effectively.
There's some really interesting stats around the manager and engagement, and one of the ones that I use when I'm talking to a group of managers is that they need to be aware of the connection to their KPIs that engagement brings, and the research is pretty clear and building as well that this matters. And when you look at the correlation to what the manager influences and what they don't, the direct manager in by and large in most organizations affects 80% of the variance in a team's engagement. Their impact is exponentially more than anyone else. And so if they don't constantly focus on how to get the best from their people, and not just, this isn't about placating and making them happy, but giving them the innate drivers of what will motivate them, or creating the best environment there. If they don't have a real focus on that, they're kind of blind leading the blind in a sense, and they really need to understand that they are the difference. Whether or not they want to admit that, it is down to them.
Both in the positive and the negative. And how I relate this is just by way of human behavior. Is the same way that children look to parents for guidance, and they tend to replicate that, is the same way that employees look to leaders for guidance and replicate that. And there's that old adage that says a fish rots from the head, so it is it is interesting that if you don't get like the culture right at the beginning, and if you don't get the congruency of message and behaviors at the top, then everything else is just going to rot right underneath that. So I suppose we should somewhat wrap, like we can talk for days on this, couldn't we? But to wrap it up, with the survey, with the 10 million data points that you found, were there any specific actions or recommendations that came out of that survey report?
Yeah, really clear themes at a global level, and then regionally, largely the same. Three things. One, mental well-being. It's good for business, and if that's news to anyone today, you really need to stop and check yourself a little bit. But don't put a band-aid on this. If this isn't a focus for both leadership and managers in your business around the physical and mental well-being of your people, then you are in for something hard in 2021, because there's going to be real competitive advantages for certain companies in their employment brand and offering. Two, you mentioned a couple of times around remote working, where it's physically possible. This isn't going to go away, and you need to reimagine the level of flexibility that you give most of your employees, and let go of the industrial era understanding that you are at a desk and I can watch you, because that is gone. And if you try to hold on to that, you are going to actively disengage your team. But you need to ensure the output and the way people work is optimized for the job you are doing.
Yeah.
And the final thing is growth. Growth is the one driver. So when you talk about professional development, it's the one driver in all the things that we measure that didn't change in 2020. And that is one thing that is very highly correlated to attrition. So especially if you're top performers, so if you have a performance management program and you're looking at your top tiers, if their growth scores aren't moving, then you need to be really careful.
So growth scores as in their own professional development, you're saying? Growth scores or?
Yes, so when we ask them, I feel I am growing professionally in my organization. So there's a couple of questions directly related to that. So it's that score, the understanding or perception that employees are moving their careers forward.
Yeah, right.
And if they're not, they will be looking to leave next year. It is one of the 4 highest correlations around attrition in the whole data set. So just be aware that while people were willing to put that on hold in 2020, they're not anymore, and it needs to move forward.
See, and this is the contradiction that I see in the workplace, that okay, there's mid-year reviews, there's end-of-year reviews. Some people are still treating those like a tick and a flick, and it's like the stone in the shoe, you just have to have the conversation. I think the mindset has to shift, that it's not about like the piece of paper, it's about the conversation. It's about sitting down, engaging with people, having a coffee, really finding out where they want to be, but also too knowing that there's differences in demographics. So like the millennials and the Gen Ys that are coming in, knowing the fact that they want a pathway, they want the next steps, they want to be the CEO within 12 months, and they want to get paid $1 million. But it's actually about how do you entertain that? Because even when I was doing my MBA research about leadership and its connection to motivation, basically what we identified was the top 5 motivators was development of self, recognition, being kept informed, variety and interesting work, and money. But the interesting thing was money was number 5 out of that, but the highest one is actually recognition. And when we delve into that further, leaders need to recognize people to the value of the individual, because public recognition could actually be an embarrassment to somebody else. But the commonalities that everybody wanted was development of self. But the value came from, give me things that can go on my CV today that I can take with me into the future that will enable me to do my job properly, which is the Dan Pink thing around mastery. But also too, it gives me flexibility and choice to move either out of the organization. But I think the trick is the game of snakes and ladders, getting to the top is gone, it's now flattening out. I think that the trick is keeping people within the organization and giving them development opportunities on the job, off the job, online, mentoring, whatever it might be, and have them working still within the business, but across the business. And that's where the engagement piece comes into it, I think.
I totally agree, and I'll leave it with an anecdote that a CEO of a company that I worked for told me on the first day I walked in. It was a very large company. He said, "Luke, I want you to think about the day you're going to leave here, and plan for that from now. And I want you to enjoy and build yourself in every moment in between." And I think if we can take that approach to our teams, that development and that recognition, that journey is so much more positive. So I fully agree with everything you just said.
Absolutely. Luke, I don't know about you, but I've just really enjoyed our banter with that. With the survey report, you've sent through the PDF to me. So what I might do is I might upload that in the show notes for this, and with that I can maybe drop the link to you as well, so if people want to reach out to you, they can. We'll do that, and I just want to thank you for your time today. Any other comments before we wrap it up?
No, thank you, Greg. If people are interested in more of the research reports around this data set, if you Google Peakon and Heartbeat, that is the research portal that we have, that we post these every month or so. So been a real pleasure, Greg, and thanks so much for the invite.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Catch you later. See you.
Bye.